Welcome to the Digital Dose, the podcast where healthcare technology meets real human stories. I'm your host, Zelcha Emmanuel, and my guest today, Udith V, co-founder of and CEO of LogicFlo AI, a Boston-based startup that just raised 2.7 million from Lightspeed to solve one of the most overlooked problems in life sciences. The fact that the brightest minds in pharma and biotech are spending their days formatting documents instead of advancing science. Udith dropped out of Harvard Business School to build his company with his childhood friend Arun. Before that, he was inside of Abbott's CEO's office watching PhDs and medical writers spend weeks on paperwork that AI could handle in minutes. Udith, welcome to the Digital Dose.
Thank you so much, Zelcha. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're excited to have you. Well, you were inside Abbott CEO's office watching some of the smartest people in medicine spend their time on paperwork. Walk me through what you actually saw and what was the moment that made you say, this has to change?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, right? I think fundamentally, beyond the R&D and drug discovery process and the clinical trials, there's a ton of, human effort from PhDs and terminal degree holders being spent on how the therapy is communicated to patients and doctors alike, right? And there's, pharma companies, rightly so, take a lot of care in exactly what is being communicated and how it translates to the external world. Now, I am of the opinion that that is absolutely necessary, right? Because it's millions of patient lives that you're talking about. Um, my contention is that the way in which these processes were set up was from an era before we have the technology that we have today, right? And so the way in which we do them needs to change, right? I'll give you one example. In Abbott, we had a pricing change that was approved, right, for a drug of ours. Now the packaging needed to change to reflect that. The problem was that we couldn't get that approved and over the line on time in a financial year, which means we could only do the price change the year after. So there was 1 year of revenue and profit that we sort of missed out, right? And this was just a process that is a pretty straightforward process, and it's important to follow that process, but it could have been done on time. So it's that kind of antiquated sort of processes that we're looking to change in LogicFlow.
Wow. Well, was there a specific person that or a specific moment that crystallized it?
Yeah, I mean, this particular thing, right, is that everybody, when when the packaging change didn't come through in time, I mean, the approval for the price change was done, the CEO approved it and signed off on it. But it was something as simple as, hey, the packaging should reflect, accurate information. And that's an admirable sentiment. I mean, it's absolutely necessary, right? Because the patient looks at the packaging and gets a lot of their information about the drug from the packaging. And so this is a clear example of why that process or the sort of intention behind that process is absolutely necessary. But the way in which we could have done it could have been a lot more efficient. And so we could have, saved about a year's worth of delay, right? And so I think that moment, every single person involved agreed that, hey, this was such a simple thing that we could have done faster. And everyone was frustrated, right? But at the same time, this is sort of when I dug into it, the answer was that's how it's always been done, right? And so that was the moment that I felt, hey, maybe there's something to be said for challenging that status quo.
Makes sense. Well, you left Harvard Business School to build this, and that's not a decision people make casually. What did you know that made leaving feel like that was the right call rather than a reckless one?
Oh yeah, this is a question I get asked all the time. You can imagine that my family wasn't too happy about it and was surprised. No, but the story is actually a lot more different than people would think, right? The ecosystem at Harvard is geared towards supporting entrepreneurs, right? And I remember at the beginning of my second year of MBA, a couple of my courses revolved around innovating in healthcare, starting life sciences ventures, and the sort of process in that course is to help students start game-changing companies in the space. And so, in a weird way, it's actually because of those courses and the sort of support mechanism for entrepreneurship in Harvard working well that it just so happened that we landed our first enterprise customer. We landed our funding round from Lightspeed in less than 5 days, and it sort of just happened. And so I just reached a point where you just know that there's something, we're onto something, and that there's real demand for what we're building, and it's really solving a problem, and the time to do it is right now. And so it was almost with the blessings of my professors at Harvard that I, ventured out to start the company in earnest.
Wow. I mean, that's a vision. You co-founded LogicFlo with your childhood friend Arun, who built AI for Da Vinci surgical, right? Robot. How does a friendship, end up building a compliance AI company in Boston?
Oh yeah, I mean, we both are from India, in the southern part of India called Chennai, and that's not even in the top three largest cities of India, right? So it's just we go back 25 years. We did primary school, middle school, high school, undergrad, all of that together, right? And so we always wanted to, when we wanted to start a company individually, I think it was sort of a no-brainer that we would do it with each other, right? It just happened to be serendipity that both of us are in life sciences. And I was in Abbott as chief of staff as a CEO. He was working in intuitive surgical, building cutting edge, high precision, low latency machine learning models to help autonomous surgery with the Da Vinci robot. So, I mean, he's one of the most expert machine learning engineers that I know, absolutely world class, right? And so when your best friend happens to also be, technologically world class at the cutting edge of a field, that's just pure serendipity, right? And so whenever I was in the Bay Area, I would crash with him. It literally crashed on his couch, right? And we would keep jamming different ideas, and we always kept gravitating back towards our experiences in life sciences. So it just ended up being an absolute no-brainer. And that kind of trust between co-founders, I would say, is the single biggest factor, especially in the earlier days of a company, right? For something to sort of coagulate and come together in the way that it has for us.
Wow. What does a room bring technically that you couldn't have built this without?
Like I was saying, Arun is an absolute beast when it comes to machine learning. And, the thing is that he's built cutting edge machine learning in a field where, people don't really, I mean, he's gone plumbed the depths of the field. He's literally built AI in a surgical context, right? I mean, the models that he built are actually deployed in the Da Vinci robot, and these robots actually perform surgery on humans, right? And so that's probably the requirement of compliance and accuracy and just being sure about what you're building. It's just about the highest in what he built than anywhere else in the world, right? And so he understands the importance of responsible adoption and responsible building of AI. He understands, he's seen firsthand, you know, he's one of those unique technology experts that also has seen how technology meets actual patient lives, and he takes it extremely seriously. And that reflects in every single choice that he makes architecturally, design wise, in building anything at all, right? And so that's sort of an alignment and agreement that we don't really need to have a conversation about. And we both take that extremely seriously. And for an engineer who's in deep in technology to also get that and take it that seriously, that's invaluable.
Wow. Well, life science is famously hard to sell into. Long sales cycle, procurement, committees, legal reviews. Why did you choose this sector when you could have built AI tools for a much easier market?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's something that friends of mine who are not in the space ask me from time to time. But the first thing is that anything worth solving doesn't come easy. And so for Arun and me both, it wasn't enough that we solved an exciting problem. We wanted to solve a meaningful problem, right? And in this case, if we can actually solve this problem of the massive underutilization of PhDs and expand, give them superpowers to be able to focus on the science, just the thought of how many patient lives could be impacted, it goes beyond exciting. I mean, it gives us a lot of purpose and meaning, right? And when it is notoriously hard to say, I mean, ultimately, people take time. People are rightfully skeptical about newer technology. It doesn't happen that, things just get adopted in a day. All of those constraints and challenges are there. But I think that purpose and meaning that we derive from the idea of the problem that we're solving, right? And our vision of what the world looks like if we solve the problem, that transcends any of these questions in terms of how difficult it is, right? And the more difficult it gets, honestly, the more energized we become, because it also means that that's in the most difficult areas are where people are going to stop trying to solve things. And so you actually achieve something meaningful only if you sort of break through that brick wall and persevere. So that's both of our thinking on that.
Absolutely. Well, was there ever a moment where you questioned that choice?
Interesting. So I would say absolutely not for me and Arun from a co-founder standpoint. But I will say that, friends, some potential investors and so on do keep raising that question, right? And I won't lie to you. I think there have been, like with any company, having ups and downs. We've had some really difficult moments. I mean, we've had moments where everybody in the room is completely aligned on what we're building and the value add that we can bring to their company. But then, there's some compliance constraint or some rule or constraint from within the company that just doesn't allow even our champions inside our customers' company to actually push through. And, some of those moments can be quite frustrating. But, the way we handle it is that's sort of part and parcel for the journey. Within all of that, we've also seen people who tried our product and used it really evangelize the LogicFlo AI product internally and push through a lot of those systemic constraints and actually get us in. Each of those moments makes all of the other difficult moments so worth it that, for the two of us as founders, it's never really been something that we've questioned.
Well, walk me through what actually happens when a medical writer or regulatory strategist use Logic Flow for the first time. What does their day look like before, and what does it look like after?
Yeah, I love the before after framing, right? Simply put, just given how critical all of the sort of commercialization workflows and the scientific communication to doctors and patients, they're so critical that they go through multiple steps, right? So there's a literature review step where each time they go the writers go through thousands of papers, then go through abstracts manually and try and get at the most highest fidelity set of sources so that they are accurate in whatever they're writing. Then there's that entire writing process and rewriting, and the core objective of medical communication is not just to accurately communicate what the data says, but it's also to communicate it in a way that doesn't leave any scope for misinterpretation from patients or doctors. Because if there is misinterpretation and then there's a different inference, then people could use the therapies in a way that's not intended, and it could lead to catastrophic outcomes. So you kind of need to think 10 levels in to say, well, I meant to say this, but also it shouldn't be there shouldn't be scope for it to be interpreted in any other way. So that is an iterative process and requires a lot of cognitive load. And to ensure that, there's a significant medical, legal, regulatory review process, and there's many iterations between the writers, between the heads of the department, between, in some cases, the outsourced agency partners. So it's such a long, convoluted, multi-step process that it takes 8 to 10 weeks and sometimes more to be able to get even a single piece of material out the door. It's important to have those checks and balances, but at the same time, those weeks and months could be pretty costly. That also means the patient doesn't get the therapy that quickly. And so, how do we solve that trade-off, right? So when someone uses LogicFlow, we don't let the AI agent take decisions or judgment on behalf of the writers. The writer and the medical affairs personnel, they are in control. But what really happens is, if I were to go through 1,000 papers, previously I would have read abstracts, but now the AI agent goes through the full text of the paper and gets the most relevant information. Yeah. Now, during the actual writing process, the way people work now is, they input something into a chat GPT or a copilot and then get an output, and then they have to spend a ton of time reworking it anyway. But with LogicFlow, the direction of what kind of sources to use and how to architect it, that comes from the human user. The agent just speeds up that process and gives the user multiple options and gets them to review it. And so, in essence, the human user is sculpting the end output in tandem with the AI agent. And it's not just a one shot, let me give it to the AI and then see what it spits out. And so that means that all of the consideration in terms of compliance, in terms of being accurate, the human user still controls all of that while speeding up each of these complicated steps in the process and reducing the number of iterations. Same goes true for the review as well. The AI agent does a pass of review and surfaces any oversight, right? from the human writer even before it goes through the first pass of MLR review, right? And so in each of these steps, it saves a few hours here, a few hours there, and suddenly you're looking at a few days to end output, as opposed to a few months. So that's the way life changes when using LogicFlo AI.
Wow. Well, you've said that deployments start at 20 to 30 users and expand organically. What does that organic expansion tell you about how the product is landing?
Oh, yeah. We typically start off with the medical affairs team, right? But because we're full stack in that we cover the literature review and the writing and the content creation and the final sort of review, and also all of the ops in terms of, uploading your material onto Viva, making sure your references are accurate. As soon as, one team starts using it, there's organic word of mouth within the company. So, we've been approached by the regulatory team, the clinical team, to repurpose our agents and our product for slightly different use cases. So if the medical affairs team was writing a publication or making a deck for a congress, the regulatory team has asked us, hey, can we also use this to write some of our regulatory documents? And the clinical team has said, hey, can we take the CSR and write the final version of it, or can we, help us with writing the protocol document for the phase 3 given the results of the phase 2, and so on and so forth, right? And so what we see is in production, in our pilot, we cross that barrier. For when folks actually use our product, they realize that rather than selling them, hey, you can automate away everything, even if it is one or two extra manual steps, those steps end up being critical to the user actually being able to use the product to get to compliant, accurate end output. And that actually seems to be working a lot better. And so the demand for the product, as soon as a few people in an organization start using it regularly, starts expanding organically. And that's, I mean, it's honestly the most satisfying thing ever when some of the design choices that you've made resonate so much with the users and customers that you have.
Wow. Well, you described LogicFlow as a shift from systems of record to systems of engagement. Explain that for a health IT leader who lives in Epic and Viva all day.
Absolutely. I think this underpins one of the fundamental shifts that's happening right now when the entire cloud revolution took over, right? Today we have Viva as the de facto CRM, and we have essentially digital systems of record. All of a pharma company's information is stored on SharePoint or AWS. In the early to mid 2000s, that wasn't the case, right? It was physical systems of record and so on, right? I mean, you have to actually maintain notebooks and files and maybe PDFs on emails, right? So that process, what it did was it brought everything to a single cloud sort of center, and that enabled a single source of truth. It didn't actually make people's lives easier, right? It just moved onto the digital realm. In many cases, the learning and maintenance of these digital tools increase the workload for a lot of the knowledge workers in pharma. But today, what we have is AI agents have become smart enough that they're able to, decisions or perform actions based on a variety of inputs without you explicitly telling it to do one specific thing. So it can understand context. What that means is you can actually bifurcate all the work that you have into work that is mundane and repeatable, and work that is cognitive and requires judgment, right? And expertise and experience. So sitting here today, we're able to pull, users in pharma who are, remember, these guys are PhDs and MDs and whatnot, right? To be able to focus on the thing that they do best, which is exercise their judgment and take the right calls. While, the repeatable work that's more mundane can be offloaded to an intelligent system. And so that's a system of engagement. The way in which you interact with the data and the way in which work is done itself is fundamentally changing. And I think what that means is we're now about to solve the underutilization crisis of experts in pharma, right? People with terminal degrees who have the most in-depth view of their field can utilize their experience to take judgment calls and exercise. They can discern between what is right and what is wrong, and then they're not limited by execution dexterity, which can be taken off their plate by intelligent AI agents.
Is there a national integration path between LogicFlow and EHR World, or are these fundamentally different
Oh
workflows?
yeah, yeah. I mean, we're in the commercialization, sort of leg of the pharma life cycle, right? And as in today, we're still focusing on the Vivas and of the world, right? How do you make the internal operations of a pharma company more efficient? But in the long term, the goal really is how do we know exactly whether a drug is working on different sets of patient population? Right? I mean, your clinical trial, as well designed as it may be, is still limited to a control group and a sample of patients. But when the drug goes out into the real world and is being used by actual patients, it's the wild, wild west, right? I mean, different people with different biomarkers and different attributes could react differently to the same drug. And how are we as sort of custodians of the health of these patients, how are we intelligently monitoring that? How are we mitigating against some of these adverse events in the future? My vision really is that if we can have a real time sort of evidence generation monitoring system that can then very rapidly be communicated back to patients and doctors to say, hey, this is what is actually happening right now with patients, this is what we need to be focusing on, these are the safety incidents, right? And this particular biomarker is where this medication is the most effective, right? That information, the less time lag there is and the more real time it is, the more beneficial for patients. And so that's my vision of an ideal humming system of feedback between the real world and what therapies we're building for patients.
Well, every AI output in LogicFlow is fully traceable back to the source. A research paper, a PDF, a spreadsheet. How technically hard was that to build? And why does it matter so much for regulated industries?
Oh, that's a great question. The thing with the advent of the chat GPTs and Claudes of the world, right, is that it's amazing what it can do and get you 80%, 90% of the way, right?
Mhm.
They're super intelligent. And they can do things that you couldn't have dreamed of from technology 3 years ago, right? The problem really is in a regulated industry. The devil is in the details, right? Every single thing that you say matters. Every claim that you make matters. Every data point matters. Now, these AI models are fundamentally stochastic, right? They're probabilistic in their nature. I mean, the way they work is a large language model is a next word predictor, right?
Right.
And so, just by definition, you can never guarantee 100% accuracy. That's not a bar that's viable for pharma, right? And so building the accurate referencing system, we have our proprietary knowledge graph that we've built out. That was a choice that we made because we wanted to solve the problem and not just build AI for AI's sake or because the technology was new or it's cool, right? There are some things you can do with these new AI models that you couldn't do before. How can you couple that while focusing on the first principles of, well, we need 100% reference and accuracy, and we need to be compliant. And how do you build proprietary systems for that to be able to build a workflow that works in this day and age? And that took a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of proprietary build that we have done over the last few years, right? And that's another reason why someone like my co-founder Arun, who's the world's leading expert on some of these models and architectural choices, really game changing, right? And so we're really proud of what we've built, and the difference is seen by users and it's felt by them when they use the product.
Well, what does an audit of LogicFlow output look like when a regulatory comes asking?
Right. I mean, the most basic thing is the amount of time that, a medical writer or somebody in a pharma company needs to spend after the creation of their document to ensure every single thing that's being mentioned in that document or presentation is referenced right down to the page and paragraph number so that if anybody has to audit it, then just check, at any point in time is a huge amount of effort, but it's also not moving the needle from getting the therapy to market, right? That's a safety measure, right? Hours and hours. I mean, if it takes someone, 5 hours to write a manuscript, it takes them 5 to 7 hours to do the referencing piece. I mean, it takes as much time. Now with LogicFlow, what happens is all of that gets auto-populated. As you sculpt the output with the agent in the backend is accurately marking all of those references and storing them in a way that's audit ready. That's ready for, any audit at any point in time from the FDA or anyone else, right? And so it just makes the preparation for that audit near zero. All right. And so that just makes it writers can now just breathe easy, right? They can sleep well at night knowing that all of that is documented and all the references are already populated in a way that's audit ready. So that's been a game changer for our users.
Thank you for that. You have a Fortune 500 pharma company under contract. What convinced them, and what was the conversation they got from pilot to contract?
Yeah, I mean, we have multiple Fortune 500 customers now, which is great. Yeah, the boundary to jump over was not the pilot to production for us. It was more getting to the pilot itself, right? The reason for that is some of these large companies have been seeing a lot of demos that when they actually try the product out doesn't work as intended, right? And so there was something that I would call a pilot fatigue. People are piloting a lot of tools, but nothing actually works in the real world. And so getting to production was a challenge for most of those players because of that, largest customer was very skeptical to even try the product, to even, do a pilot. But what we did was we said, hey, let's make this super easy for you. Let's de-risk it for you. Pick one project, pick the smallest set of users, just try the product out. You can feel the magic. We did a 3-month pilot with our first customer, right? Because we were also sort of using that as experience to build out what the product looks like in its fully finished state, right? So there's a 3-month pilot, which means, our users had the time to understand how it works, understand why it was different from other products that they've seen in demos or other pilots. Pretty much at the end, look, I'll be honest, I didn't expect that to convert at all. This was back when, before I dropped out and I was still trying this out. They came and said, hey, we love the product. We want to use it. In fact, they were like, hey, what would it take to acquire you? And so we were like, hey, okay, look, this is too early to be acquiring the product or the company. If the product actually lives in the market, it grows and becomes better over time. And so maybe, that's a conversation for a later stage. So I think we really got a lot of confidence with the fact that, the company, our customer liked it enough to say, hey, this is a source of competitive differentiation. Let's try and acquire them, right? And so that was very heartening. And we didn't have to sell them on anything once they actually tried the product in the pilot. The only questions they had was around security and privacy. And given my sort of background in AI privacy and security, that was not a challenge at all. We had those systems up and running and we were able to deploy in quick time.
Thank you. Well, what do they use it for? What workflow did LogicFlow replace?
Oh yeah. So, all of the medical communications workflows, right? So right from publications of a basically clinical trials data to, posters for their congresses, presentation decks for their key opinion leaders, and localization. So one of the big use cases were, hey, we have this published material, but we want to expand into South Asian markets, and we want to produce review articles for each of those journals and localize the context of the therapy for that local population, right? Now, that's a ton of different work streams across geographies, but because of LogicPro, they were able to do that in quick succession parallelly. And so, they were able to launch their product in record time in these markets, right? And I think that's when they were seeing the potential. And now they've started using us, like I mentioned, for some of the regulatory workflows, some of the commercial workflows. And so that's part of the organic expansion that we're seeing. And in the next 1.5, 2 years, we're going to be scaling up to 300 plus teams within that one organization alone.
Wow. Well, you said move fast and break things is a recipe for disaster in this industry. What does responsibility AI deployment look like in the world where the EU AI Act is now in force and the FDA guidance is still catching up?
Yeah, that's a great question. The move fast and break things, that's a very Silicon Valley tech ethos, right? Those were actually not my words, but the words of a CEO of a large pharma company, where they basically said, we're not the sort of people that move fast and break things, right? Fundamentally in pharma, Even if it takes time, we want to make sure we're sure about the science before we put a therapy in the hands of patients. Now, given that ethos, I think, you know, we've had to, as a company and a founding team, straddle that, hey, we build tech and it's gotten a lot easier to build cool tech. But at the same time, in the sector, we should not compromise on that, on the ethos of being sure about what you're building, right? And so I think we've made the choice to focus on AI security, privacy, and compliance from day zero. Even if it means it takes us a little longer to deploy the product to market, even if it means we need to be a lot more patient, so be it, right? Because we simply cannot afford any mistakes. With new AI models, there are new security threats and vectors that have opened up, right? And that's something that the world at large is still trying to figure out how to protect against, how to make sure your systems are completely secure. And so what we do is, we have dedicated compliance and security personnel, right? Whose only full-time job is to keep red teaming and penetration testing our models, to keep building guardrails around what we're building, and to keep in touch with all of the latest research around any new security threats and vectors, right? And so that focus is something that we've built in day zero. And for a company that's starting out, it's not something that software companies and other sectors just do from day zero. And so we've put real resources behind it, and we take it extremely seriously from day one.
Are your healthcare customers asking the right questions about AI compliance, or are most of them still just try and see phase?
Yeah, look, I think many of our customers still live in the SaaS or software era, and those are still table stakes, right? You still need to protect yourself and have the compliance measures that were core to the SaaS era. I still think the world at large is trying to figure out, well, what are these new challenges? How credible are they? And what are sort of the best practices to be able to guard yourself against any credible threat? And so to that extent, I'd say it's still evolving. I think the downside is that what that's led to, specifically in the pharma context, is extreme skepticism, right? To the point where in some cases I feel like it's also hindering people's tendency to explore and experiment, right? And I do think that there's a middle ground. I think there is a way to carve out sandboxes and experiment in controlled environments, right? So that you can start figuring out what those edge cases are in your scenario and then guard against those, right? And so I guess my sort of client call to the AI and digital leaders of the industry is, you know, yes, it takes a little extra effort to carve out those sandboxes and experiment, but that's the way to keep pushing the boundaries forward without creating unnecessary risk for existing workflows. And I do hope that we'll see more of the sort of middle ground arrangements of experimenting, trying, and then inch towards deploying responsible AI systems, even if we're not sprinting recklessly.
Well, you said that there's an estimated 360 billion in annual spend on repetitive tasks in life sciences that could be automated. If LogicFlow captures even a fraction of that, what does the life sciences industry actually look like in 10 years?
Oh, that's a great question. I think fundamentally the thesis is undeniable, right? Whether logic flow captures it, somebody else does a better job, immaterial. I think what me and my co-founder care about is that the vision that we have for the future of how we operate as a sector, as long as that's realized, we're happy, right? We'd love to be at the forefront of it and leading the way. And so what is that vision? The vision is, we talked about how we're moving from systems of record to systems of engagement. The
Hmm.
deeper sort of implication of that is that intelligence is now starting to be commoditized, right? And at the fingertips of every single person, right? And I say person because it's true in people's personal lives, it's true in their professional lives, in their knowledge work. Just given the sheer will and ambition of folks in biotech and pharma, I mean, you think about the conditions and diseases that existed 50, 100 years ago that don't exist today, that's not even a concern today, or you think about the way in which the world came together to solve COVID, right? How do we tap into that and not drag them back by mundane, repetitive documentation and processes, and let the brightest minds in the world that are focusing on these crucial problems harness all of their intellect, all of their experience, and all of their passion and ambition to take game changing, life changing therapies to patients? How do we make sure that they're spending 99 to 100% of their time purely focused on that without being burdened by, repetitive work, procedural work, right? While also retaining why those procedures exist, while remaining compliant, while remaining safe, right? That's our dream, right? And we feel strongly that that it will be a reality sooner rather than later.
Okay. Well, what is the medical writer role? Does the medical writer role disappear or does it evolve into something different?
Uh, Yeah, this is such an often asked question, right? I mean, larger sort of version of this is AI going to take all of our jobs or whatnot, right? And so, my take on this is that there is never going to be any dearth for still important problems to solve. And for as long as there are critical problems to solve, humankind will chase those problems and try to solve them in the best way they can.
Hmm.
What changes over time is what are the tools we have in our arsenal to be effectively able to solve these problems and how we actually deploy them and utilize them so that we can push the human race forward. And that fundamental tenet is never going to change. So to sort of take that context into the medical writer role, I think what it means to be a medical writer will fundamentally change, right? I mean, you think about it at its core, that role exists because there's a certain responsibility that we have as pharma companies building game changing therapies to communicate the right thing to the patient and to doctors. And so that fundamental need will not change. But the way in which we do it, the frequency with which we do it, what a writer does on a daily basis, are they spending time uploading references onto Viva? Or are they making sure that everything is referenced, but then they don't have to worry about it so that they can spend more of their time thinking about the implication of what they've written or or thinking about the next thing to communicate? Those are the things that they will start focusing on. So what it means to be a medical writer will definitely change, right? With the technology that we have at our disposal, but the responsibility that we have towards patients and doctors, that's not going to change. And so it's just a question of how we do it. Are we more effective? Are we faster without compromising on our values and our compliance? Uh, those are the things that will change. But I don't see, you know, I don't see it sort of fundamentally changing the purpose with which we do what we do today.
Absolutely. Well, the FDA is now actively issuing guidance on AI clinical workflows. As someone building compliance first AI, are you working with regulators or waiting to see where the frameworks land?
No, we're working very actively, actually, right? One of the ways in which we add value, especially to our friends in the regulatory side of things and in the FDA and the US Senate at large, is because we're building at the absolute edge of the technology, we sort of serve as sort of thought leaders to help people in the regulatory halls sort of understand what are the real risks, what are the real challenges, right? What's possible, what's not possible, and sort of to ground them in what the technology can and cannot do and what the real risks are, so that they're better informed when it comes to framing policy architectures and criteria. And so it's definitely not just a wait and watch game, right? Having said that, we also, and I think LogicFlo is somewhat unique in that we actually welcome regulation. I mean, our worry is more that regulators and law find it hard to move at the pace at which the technology progresses, right? And so it's the gray area of, well, there is no regulation process, there is no sense of broad alignment among people on the regulatory and legal side and on the technology side on what is kosher versus not, right? And that gray area is a lot more stressful. And so the sooner we can get to effective codification of some of these things and alignment among all of the stakeholders involved, the better it is for the industry at large.
Absolutely. What's the one regulatory question that keeps you up at night?
Yeah. Well, it's not a single question. Like I said, it's when there's a lack of questions and just blockage. that's where I get concerned. Right, is that it's a fairly understandable tendency, right? Before you understand something, you just stop any kind of progress so that you can take your time to understand it. I think that's the most stressful thing for me, right? And honestly, what I'd love to see is, are there ways in which we can experiment and learn without actually taking on too much risk, right? And I think that's the, I mean, if you look at any of the technology that's now standard, there has been phases of experimentation, there have been incidents of some failures here and there, but that's what we've used to learn and move forward. And I think in the time that we figure out what the standard should be, it's just important for all of us to figure out safe ways of experimenting and, inching towards progress over time.
Well, Lightspeed backed you. They managed 25 billion globally and the 20 plus healthcare companies in their portfolio. What do they see in this market that other investors have missed?
Oh, interesting. Well, fundamentally, nobody that I've spoken to, whether it's venture capitalists, potential customers, other founders, nobody disagrees with the thesis of what we're building, right? Nobody
Mhm.
disagrees with the vision of what should be. But I think what Lightspeed did admirably is venture capital and tech investing or AI investing by its fundamental nature. This is a phase of, a lot of noise and a lot of hype, and people are looking for a lot of quick wins, right? How do we, become an open AI within 4 or 5 years, right? How do we become a multi-billion dollar, revenue churning machine? A lot of focus from a lot of VCs and founders alike. I think what Lightspeed really, I should give them props for is, despite being a venture capitalist, they're in it for the long run, right? They're in it for for patient gains. Because, like you mentioned, it is notoriously difficult to sort of bring the change management forward in a sector like pharma. It's going to take time. This vision that we have, it's not going to happen overnight, right? And so it was just extremely important for us to have investors on board that understand the dynamic of the sector, and understand why it is important to be compliant and safe from day one, even if it means slightly slower progress. And I think that is something that they were on board with from the first day. The other thing that they told us is that with a lot of these things at the early stage, the conviction is on execution, right? And so they needed to have conviction on the founders, because at this stage it could go any other way. Like the thesis could be sound, but
Mhm.
execution and the early team and the founders make all the difference in the world. And so, again, me and my co-founder, I believe that we're the perfect fit because we have the exact right balance of technology expertise and life sciences experience and empathy for the sector that'll actually help us build a product that the sector and the users in the sector love while also being technologically forward.
Yep. Well, one thing a CAIO at health systems should be asking every AI vendor that most of them aren't asking. What is that?
Where does your product fail? Because it's become really easy to construct demos that look great, but when the rubber meets the road, where does it actually fail? As on today, right? And then solve for that actively over time, and understand that it's sort of an ongoing process of iterative improvement, but it's important to ask that point blank. And I found that our early customers actually asked us that point blank, and it actually forced us to think and be extra prepared, right? Both from our actual product build and when we're talking to customers and deploying.
So let me ask you this. When the digital dose audience follow up with LogicFlow's journey and connect with you, where do they follow up with you?
I'm super active on LinkedIn. That's the best place to reach me. Or the logicflow.ai website is also a great place to reach us.
Well, thank you so much for your time on this call today, Udith V. It has been absolutely phenomenal. I look forward to definitely getting this out to the audience. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Zelcha. I really appreciated the nuanced questions, and I had a great time speaking with you and sharing my thoughts as well.